Hi, I'm Alan Hedblum. Welcome to our show, a place to feel like you belong. Today's guest is Susan Im. During our conversation, you'll notice words and phrases appearing on the screen. We will go over those in detail in a segment called What'd You Say? For more information, you can go to our website at feellikeyouBelong.com. But for now, let's welcome today's guest. Earlier, our friend Susan Im came by and talked with us about the complexities of U.S. immigration law. We're going to turn the conversation a little bit and make it more personal now. Susan is an immigration attorney in Grand Rapids. Her firm, Im Law, specializes in U.S. immigration law. But Susan, you were telling me your parents are both immigrants, and so this actually has a special meaning for you because you work with immigrant populations now, but you actually lived this experience yourself growing up.
Yes, Alan, I did. My parents both immigrated from South Korea. In fact, my mother preceded my father. She came here initially in 1958 as an exchange nurse on the J-1 visa, and then was here for 6 months of training, I believe, and then went back. And then she came back really to stay in 1964, again as an exchange nurse. And I remember my parents talking about it. It was when the Beatles hit. It was 1964. It was at the same time when the Beatles hit. Lots of excitement and a lot of unknown for, my mother and then my father who followed her.
Mm-hmm. So your folks are big Beatles fans?
They were big Beatles fans. Yes. In fact, our whole family really loves the Beatles. How could you not like the Beatles? I know there are people that do, but yeah.
So what made them choose to come to the United States? It's a big world, and Korea is their home country. It's their language, their heart. Everything is there. Yes. They packed up their lives and moved to the U.S.
Yes, it's a great question. I mean, I think it's one that rings true today. My parents had a good life in Korea. My father was a foreign medical graduate, so he graduated from one of the top, it was the top Seoul National Medical School in Korea, and so he had a bright future in front of him. My mother was an exchange nurse. She was actually a nurse in the Army and a professor in the U.S. Army, and both of them served in the Korean War. She and my father felt very strongly that in looking at the opportunities for the next generation, that it was the United States. Even over Korea and the wonderful life that the careers they had and what lied ahead of them, because they were still fairly young, it was the next generation and the opportunities.
Did they talk about that as you were growing up? Because obviously as a teenager, you're not so interested in mom and dad's story. It's because as teens we tend to be a little bit more self-involved. But as you grew older, as an adult, did you have a chance to talk with your parents about what this meant to them to give up a life of relative comfort and ease? You speak the language, you turn on the radio, you get everything. You understand family and rules, and you look at the signs and you read them and it immediately makes sense.
Yes.
Did you talk about that with them?
I did, especially a little bit even as I was growing up. My siblings, my older brother Peter and my younger brother David, we witnessed the struggles that my father and mother had every day, which is really the story of so many immigrants, even today, Alan, as you know, the folks you work with. I remember going to any store, and the cashier would often have a tough time understanding my parents with their accents. My mother had the stronger accent of the two, but they both had pretty strong accents despite being here since 1964 and being fluent in English, having excellent English skills. Folks wouldn't understand them, or it might get worse than that, and we'd be driving as a family, and a pickup truck would come up next to us and they'd roll the windows down and say, "Chinks, go back to China." And I remember thinking, we're not from China, we're Korean, you ignorant people. But that would happen, and I remember thinking, why on earth did they want to give up the life they had to come here? And I remember my mother and father would just like, it's for you. It's for the generation, so you would not struggle the way we have. And we knew that the opportunities were so great here, and there was an opportunity also for them to apply the skills and the knowledge that they had gained in their home country.
You were originally in Chicago. In fact, you were born in Chicago, but you grew up in Traverse City, Michigan. So
Yes.
for all of the people who have moved to Michigan, you know that we show the palm of our right hand and we point to Traverse City being located here. What was that like? Because Traverse City is not a cosmopolitan center, not a lot of international understanding. What's it like growing
Sure.
up as a person of color, a family of color in northwestern Michigan?
Sure. I would say my personal experience was overall a very positive one, but I would say because of my parents' sacrifices, it was a positive one. There weren't very many people that looked like me growing up. I think it was my brothers, aside from me. It was the few adoptees from Korea at the time. Some of them that I befriended, and they were my childhood friends. And then the folks that ran the China Fair restaurant. There weren't a lot of people that looked like me or were minorities in general in Traverse City growing up. But I think that as a whole, to be candid, we really thrived because our parents were strong. They raised us to say, you need to be confident, you need to focus on your education. And we didn't know, really. For myself, I didn't realize how different I was because I spent my childhood trying so hard to assimilate in the culture and doing it fairly successfully. It wasn't until I left Traverse City at the age of 18 and started my college studies at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor that I encountered other people that looked like myself and really coming out of the woodwork, and really experiencing for the first time that kind of community.
So moving to Ann Arbor gave you a whole new self-awareness.
Oh, it sure did, Alan, absolutely.
And you, among other things, you joined the Asian American Student Association.
Yes.
And you had an event, you were telling me earlier, on campus. You were walking across campus and noticed some of your peers were demonstrating on campus.
Yes. I took the route when I started at the University of Michigan of being very curious of learning about other Asians like myself and wanting to get involved with organizations. So the Korean Student Association and the Asian American Association were two organizations that I got involved with. But my older brother didn't take that route. My younger brother did sort of follow as I did. But one thing, I believe it was a fall afternoon, and I was walking through the Diag, and I recognized a good Filipino friend of mine, Mike Sandoval, standing on the steps of the grad library with a sign in his hand. And the sign read, "Justice for Vincent Chin." And it was
for our viewers who don't know Vincent Chin's story.
Yes, Vincent Chin, and I didn't know Vincent Chin's story. In this fall of 1987, walking through the Diag, I wondered, there's my friend and a group of angry Asians behind him with these signs. What on earth is going on here? It must have been something horrible happened for a group of Asians to be, angry, waving these signs. And I said,
the
Mike,
polite
what
model
happened?
minority is
Yes.
getting upset.
Right. And so I saw Mike, and he waved me, toward him, and I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Do you know who Vincent Chin is?" I said, "No." Embarrassingly, I said, "No." And he said, "Well, you need to know the story. Vincent Chin was a Chinese American man who, the day before he was going to get married, visited a strip club called Fancy Pants with one of his best friends who was throwing this bachelor celebration for him. And unfortunately, he got into a verbal altercation with a couple of gentlemen, Caucasian gentlemen, who were auto workers at the Fancy Pants strip club, and there was a racial slur that was exchanged, at least one, and then they were all kicked out of the club. And apparently, the two men, Ronald Ebens was one of them, and his companion, they tried to locate Vincent Chin and ended up even paying someone to try to find him, but they ended up running into him at the McDonald's nearby, and were successful in getting him. His companion, Ronald Ebens, was the one that took a baseball bat, and his companion held him down to the ground and bludgeoned him to death. And two off-duty police officers witnessed the bludgeoning. And so I said, "That's crazy. How could that happen?" He said, "Yeah, what's crazier about it, Susan, is that in the criminal prosecution, the Wayne County judge at the time, gave these guys a $3,000 fine, probation for 3 years, and there was a court cost of $760 some, and no jail time." despite 2 off-duty police officers and eyewitness. So that had occurred, and then there were some further progressions after the criminal case with civil rights actions, and there had been a very critical development in the civil rights actions, which had come in the defendant's favor, and that protest was related directly to that outcome that had just been announced.
Aside from the ignorance of these 2 auto workers mistaking a Chinese citizen for Japanese and the business with Japanese autos are taking our jobs, what does this say to you as a person who could have been, mistaken in public about this country, about what is your feeling about how I belong or don't belong here?
That's a really good question. I really related to Vincent Chin's story in the sense that, his mother Lily was from China, and he was the first generation. He was the first generation in America, and spoke fluent English and was assimilated like myself and my brothers. That could have happened to us. And it was simply based on the way he looked that these auto workers made the comment that, it's because of you Japs that, we're out of jobs. And I really related to it, and it really struck me, Alan, this particular story, because I said, who is standing up for the rights of Asians and Asian Americans? Who is in our corner? And as I learned more, not only from my friend Mike Sandoval, but through my own investigation of what transpired in the murder of Vincent Chin and the following legal activity, or I should say, non-activity, I remember thinking, it struck me that the access to our justice system was simply not there for Lily Chin and the family of Vincent Chin. There was no one in their corner advocating for them, despite the fact that this was a horrific, really a hate crime. And hate crime laws had not been established prior to the murder of Vincent Chin, but it was a horrendous tragedy that should have never happened. So what struck me was, who's in our corner?
So it's probably no accident then that your life, your career, would be actually now directed towards helping the self-same population.
Yes, Alan, I would say that was a defining moment for me, because I thought, as many Asian students think when they're going into college, I thought I was going to be pre-med. And I thought I was pretty good at sciences in high school, and I think I was. Came to Michigan and I realized I was just okay. I was just average. Took my first chemistry class and realized, no, I'm really just average.
Well, I'm sure there are hundreds and hundreds of immigrants now that are very grateful that you took the profession that you did. As we wrap up today, is there something that you'd like to say to any of the Caucasian Americans who are watching? Is there something you'd like them to know about your story?
Sure. That's a really great question. I don't think my story is any more special or significant than so many immigrants from around the world that you meet with, that I encounter. But it's really to those that aren't in touch with the immigrant story and obstacles, or maybe have not had the pleasure of meeting someone from another country. We're all immigrants. Let's be honest. We're all immigrants at some root. It's in our history and it's our future. But to take the time, really to get to know someone that looks different from you, that really, as you get to know them, you realize they're not that much different from you and I. And so yeah, it's that message of, really, we're not all that different. We really aren't.
Super. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. And thank you
so
for
much
joining
having
us
me.
again on Feel Like You Belong. From our conversation with Susan, the first expression you saw highlighted was rings true. Susan said, that question rings true today. The expression rings true means that something still sounds correct or appropriate. The next expression that you heard or that you saw highlighted was chinks go back to China. Susan said that the pickup truck driver pulled up next to their family vehicle and shouted out the window, "Chinks go back to China." What you need to know is that the word chink is considered a racial slur against people from China. A slur is a negative, insulting word to identify a person by his or her race. The word chink refers to a narrow opening, and in this case is a reference to the typical almond-shaped eyes of people from East Asia. In the interview, Susan was doubly insulted because the Anglos had meant to sound rude or insulting to her family, but they also used the wrong word because her family's from Korea and not from China. The next reference that was highlighted was actually the palm of my right hand. I had pointed to my right hand and said, Traverse City. Because the state of Michigan is shaped like a mitten, Michiganders use their open hands as a map to point to locations within the state's lower peninsula. The next expression highlighted was assimilate. Susan said that immigrants are trying to assimilate. More recently, there's a change in philosophy in how immigrants fit into their new homeland. The word assimilation means to change oneself and to blend in without being noticed. In other words, to become one of the group. A preferred concept today is to allow immigrants the chance to acculturate. This means they can learn the ways of the new culture, but they only need to take on the beliefs or the behaviors that they truly value. This allows them to fit into the culture in practical ways without giving up a sense of their core being. Now, a good way for Americans to think about this would be to imagine losing their U.S. home and citizenship, say due to war or economics, and then imagine if they would want to convert to the religion or the culture of their new homeland. The next expression you saw highlighted was Vincent Chin. I said to Susan, some of our viewers may not know the story of Vincent Chin. As Susan explained, Vincent Chin was a Chinese American who was beaten to death by two white Americans who mistook him for Japanese. The next expression highlighted was bachelor's party. Susan said Vincent Chin was at a club for a bachelor's party. Young American men are sometimes taken by their friends to bars or clubs on the night before they get married. This kind of evening is seen as a type of male bonding and may symbolize perhaps the young man's last chance to be out in public without his wife's knowledge. The next expression you saw highlighted was model minority. I said it was surprising to see America's model minority getting upset at a public demonstration. In the U.S., East Asians are stereotyped as being hardworking and polite and therefore a good role model for other racial minorities to copy. Now, of course, this is really unfair to Asians for restricting them to studious and quiet behavior. It's also unfair to other people of color for implying that they're lazy and rude. The next expression you saw highlighted was, "You Japs." Susan said the two men thought American auto workers were out of jobs because of you Japs. The word Jap is a racial slur against the Japanese. And anytime you hear the word you added to a label, this group of people feels negatively singled out, usually because it's done by a member of a dominant group. So this could be able-bodied people, whites, males, straights, wealthy people, or Christians. The next expression highlighted was in our corner. Susan asked, who is in our corner? Someone who is in your corner is on your side, is advocating for you and wants you to win. The expression comes from the sport of boxing, where the one person a boxer can trust is the trainer in his or her corner of the boxing ring. The next expression highlighted was hate crime. Susan said Vincent Chin was killed at a time when there were no laws against hate crimes. Today, a person can be tried and punished if he or she commits a crime against someone specifically because of that person's race, ethnicity, religion, or sexual orientation. These changes are often difficult to prove in the legal system because they go beyond just the doing of the crime and go to the reason or the motivation for the crime. So other difficult vocabulary and expressions will be explained on the feellikeyouBelong.com website under the section with Susan M. What'd you say? Americans are used to making small talk and will frequently strike up a conversation even with strangers. For example, waiting in a checkout line. For newcomers to the United States, it is in your best interest to learn the skill of having brief social exchanges with coworkers, neighbors, and people at parties. Here's a list of possible conversation topics with American acquaintances. Which ones do you think are appropriate to bring up? Let's take a look at the first one. In your original culture, is it appropriate to ask someone his or her marital status? Actually, it's not an appropriate question in the United States. The question assumes that getting married is normal in society, and this is not true. For starters, some people are quite happy by themselves and choose not to marry. Others may be divorced or widowed and uncomfortable talking about it. Still others may wish to be married but have never been asked. And finally, it is still not legal in many U.S. states for gay and lesbian adults to marry. So again, this would make some people sad to have to answer no. What about the other topics on this list? Can you ask about a person's age? His or her occupation? What about salary? The other answers to these questions can be found in the What's New section of our website. Check it out before striking up a conversation with a stranger at a party. So if you're going to be interacting with a lot of Americans, you'll need to understand our sense of humor. As a culture, we tend to use sarcasm a lot in our daily interactions with coworkers and friends. Now, sarcasm has a couple of different aspects to it, which you'll need to identify. The most obvious one is also the most confusing one to non-native speakers, and that is sarcasm uses the exact opposite words from what the speaker means to communicate. The reason you can tell sarcasm, if you have a good ear, is that the speaker's tone of voice will change, and that signals to the average native speaker, oh, this person is being sarcastic and making a comment, kind of a humorous comment about a situation that just happened. Now, the second element of sarcasm is often used as a slight kind of dig or gotcha. A word that we use in English a lot is snarky. So there's an element of snark that's added when Americans use sarcasm. Let me give you an example of this. You are out with your American friends, you're playing soccer, and one of your teammates passes the ball to you, a beautiful pass, you're right in front of the goal. You wind up and kick the ball and it sails over the goal. Oh, you're so frustrated. Your American teammate turns to you and says, "Nice play, Shakespeare." So bottom line, here's the comment. Your play was not at all nice. You can tell, obviously, because you knew that you blew the play, but they used the exact opposite words of what happened. And now that you're aware of this, start to pay attention to the intonation that they use.